In the part of our today's topic, we'll first continue to cover up the portion of architecting the best solutions on the AWS. In the part of our yesterday session, we were able to look through on how do we get started with architecting for the best solutions, right? So when we talk about the cloud, so we do not have any upfront investments. We can just get started with infrastructure, and then we have better utilization of the resources, as well as we are making the resources usage only on basis of the costing, and then when it comes to time to market, we're able to make it much faster when compared to the traditional way of doing the business in the software. And other few of the benefits also we have discussed, like everything can be automated in the help of scripting. We have something like auto scaling and proactive scaling, which helps us to ensure that whenever there is a demand which is going to be on my infrastructure, automatically the cloud is helping me to scale the systems up and down, and we have the more efficient development life cycle when compared to the normal one in the traditional infrastructure. And we can also have the plans for the disaster recovery and the business continuity. And even though there is a lot of overflow of the traffic on the cloud, we'll be able to compare through. And we understood this specific diagram of elasticity, where I'm trying to involve the cost, where I'm trying to involve the infrastructure cost and then the time, right? So in the traditional method, if you have seen this blue color dot line, the blue and the gray colored are almost both of them are the little or same one for the traditional infrastructure, where we are trying to spend in lot of money at the initial level, and then we are trying to develop the solutions, and then again adding up the money, and then again adding up the infrastructure and other things, right? So this is like a step methodology, or we call this a waterfall methodology, where we are trying to go through step by step. But in case of cloud, we can start with a minimum of zero, and then we can always close off the things which are not required at any point in time. So with cloud, we have a lot of elasticity to go with. Next, now whenever you're going to be designing any kind of solution in the cloud, so in the future, whenever you're designing any kind of solution which is to be required on the cloud, always try to be a pessimist, right? So what happens by being pessimist? We try to think negative. What will happen if my server goes down? What will happen if if the availability zone goes down? What happens if the complete region itself goes down? Right? So we should always start thinking in a negative way on what can go wrong if I'm trying to deploy a solution on the cloud. And in this way, we will try to design and implement the solution in such a way that it will be always designed for any kind of recovery from the failure. So being a pessimist when designing the architecture in the cloud, and assume that things will always fail. In other words, always design, implement, and deploy automated recovery from the failure. So always think about the options where you can actually fail off while deploying the solutions in the cloud. So in that way, we'll always look for the alternative solution which is required to give us the automated recovery. So let's say in a particular situation, I assume that my hardware is going to fail. Let's say inside the AWS itself, data center, there is a chance. We never know. Like hardware itself fails, right? It does happen when we are working on a computer. Suddenly we get a blue screen error, right? So our computer gives off its way, right? So we never know what can happen at any point in time. So we should assume all the kinds of the scenarios where we can think about all the failures, right? Assume that the outages will occur. Assume that some disaster will strike your application. What if tomorrow Amazon comes up and says that we are going to have a maintenance period in the weekends, right? How are we going to manage it, right? So we should always think about all the kinds of failures. Assuming some disaster is going to strike my application, assume that it will be slammed with more than the number of requests per second. So currently we are assuming that we are going to have 100 requests per second, but let's say tomorrow you become much more popular and on your website you are expecting a surge of users. So from 100 users you are going to get, let's say, 1000 users per second. Then how are we going to manage that? So assume that assume with the time your application software will also fail, right? So we always have the software upgrades coming up, right? So initially when we started, I guess the Java was usually at very lower version, right? Today we are using some Java 1.8 or some versions, right? So versions of the software also keep changing. So assume that your software will also fail. So by being pessimist, you are trying to think about all the kind of recovery strategies that are actually required to design the overall system to be a better one. Next important point is, whenever you are going to architect a solution, remember you have to always decouple your components, right? What does the decoupling mean? Now, specifically, we are trying to remove of the dependencies between each of the layers. Okay, so if you have a application layer, if you have a database layer, if you have a web layer, you can actually remove the dependencies between each of them and then design it, right? The key is to build the components that do not have tight dependencies on each other, so that if one component were to die, fail, or sleep off, or remain busy for some reason, the other components of the systems are built so as to continue the work as if no failure is happening, right? So we are going to design this system in such a way that we should ensure that we do not have any dependency of database on the web or the application layer. So even if they are down, we should be able to continue for our database to be working all the time, right? So we have to design in such a way that we can decouple your components. So specifically, whenever you think about decoupling the components, think about the SQS. That is one of the best component which helps us to decouple the solution in the architecture, right? So you can actually keep a SQS between the web and application layer, also SQS between the application and the database layer as well, right? So in essence, loose coupling isolates the various layers of the components of your application so that each component interacts asynchronously with each other and treats them as a black box. So it doesn't have a dependency on any of the backend, and it will treat that there's nothing as such called backend where I have to update the data. It will be treated as black box, and but we are actually trying to send everything to the SQS, and from the SQS we are trying to send it to the database section. So here's one of the example. Let's say in case of web application architecture, you can isolate the application server from the web server and from the database, right? So as I said, usually what happens is in the real time, there are only two different types of architecture that we design. One is two-tier architecture, another is three-tier architecture. The example that is being shown up on your presentation screen here is a three-tier architecture where I have a web server, where I have an application server, and then I have a database server as well. So usually sometimes it also happens that there is a two-tier. In two-tier, what happens is either I have a web and the DB layer or the app and the DB layer. That's it. I have only the two layers. The database remains constant. Either of the one web or the application level layer will be removed off. And usually remember what happens with this three-tier layer. Let's say when we talk about the database, it is usually not given access to anyone, right? From outside world, never anyone will be given access to go through. So they can access it only from the jump box or a bastion host, if you remember, right? So if we have completely put this into our one of our VPC, so if I have to log in into this, usually we'll place the database in the private subnet, and in order to get into the private subnet and access this database, I'll have to first come to the public subnet, and from the public subnet I'll be able to access this, right? So here application layer is going to be a part of the public subnet, where we may actually log in, or there would be some other bastion host from where we are going to log in into the DB server. And when we talk about the application layer, here the port 22 will be opened up for your application, and this will be opened up only for the developers, right? So who are working from office, only for them, for the developers it will be open. So if they try to even work from home or somewhere else, it will not be opened up. Now web server, as we all know, it is going to be exposed to the complete public. So port 80 and port 443, both of them are required to be opened up, so that the people from across the world will be able to connect to my servers. So this is how usually we design the three-tier architecture. So web servers will be exposed to the public, and the app server, which is acting like a middleware here, is just going to be opened up for the developers of my company from my company's office network itself. That is the CyberBlock range of company. And then finally we'll have the database layer, which is completely in the private subnet, and that will be accessible only from the jump box or the application server in this case. In terms of elasticity, there's one more thing that I would like to highlight in here about auto scaling. So in auto scaling, we have three different types. One is proactive cyclic scaling, second is proactive event-based scaling, and third is auto scaling based on demand. So what we have learned is all about the auto scaling based on the demand, and the other two which we have remaining are proactive event-based scaling and proactive cyclic scaling. Now, what happens with the cyclic scaling? So let's say every day at 9 o'clock in the morning, you have is a web server which is going to conduct a game for thousands of people, right? So at that point of time, you know that you would require a lot of infrastructure, because a lot of people are going to get into a web server. So you would like to have extra systems during that specific 1 hour of time, because your game is going to continue for, let's say, 15-20 minutes, right? So in this proactive cyclic scaling, what happens? I can put up a schedule of daily, weekly, monthly, or quarterly, and say that every Monday or every Tuesday, my game is going to be started at 9 o'clock in the morning, and I'm expecting at least 5,000 of users who are going to come and connect through. Right? So I'm just trying to scale my system up so that it will be able to cater the number of users who are connected to my system. So with the proactive cyclic scaling, we are basically trying to scale up our systems every day at certain period of time. Now, proactive event-based scaling. Now, let's say you are an e-commerce website like a Flipkart, Amazon, or a Snapdeal, and let's say you are trying to launch a new product today evening at 8 o'clock, right? Like 12 o'clock, sometimes at 12 o'clock in the afternoon, we have this the sale of Redmi or some other mobiles, right? So there is an event. Specifically, it doesn't occur every day, but it may occur once in a while, right? So maybe once in 3 months, I might have a specific day on which I'm going to launch this product and make it available for the end users. So at that time, I can actually make use of this proactive event-based scaling. So scaling just when you're expecting a big surge of traffic requests due to the scheduled business event, like we are specifically like trying to launch a new product, or we are trying to market up some new campaign as well. And finally, the third one, we all know, auto scaling based on demand. So whenever the demand is going to increase, my CPU utilization is going to increase, and then we are going to make a trigger, and then it is actually trying to scale up the system. So remember, there are three types of auto scaling. One is proactive cyclic scaling, second is proactive event based scaling, and the third one is auto scaling based on the demand. So that was all about the architecting practices, architecting with the best practices on the cloud. So any questions or queries from anyone of you here? Rahul, Divya, any questions here? So we have a couple of more topics remaining in our section of the AWS here. So one of them is about the ALB and the NLB. For ALB, of course, I would like to give you a short introduction first. So what is ALB? ALB basically stands for the application load balancer. And then we have a newly introduced something called as NLB. So NLB basically stands for the network load balancer, right? So now, what is the major difference between both of them? So let's go down to the load balancers. Let's click on the create load balancer, and then you will be able to see that there are three different types, right? We have application load balancer, network load balancer, and the classic load balancer. Now, if you remember, when the Amazon first started providing the services in the cloud, it just started as one of the load balancer, and there you also had got HTTP, HTTPS, and the TCP connections, right? So we were able to use this classic load balancer for any other type of layer we want to put across to. But when we come now, what Amazon has done is it has specifically divided the layers of the traffic. So if I am trying to put it on HTTP and HTTPS, specifically we are going to use the application load balancer, and if you want to use it for the TCP requests, we are going to put it behind the network load balancers. So specifically they have divided both of them. So usually, I'm not sure if you guys have really known about this specific point. There are 7 layers of operating system, or the typical engagement that we call it as. So at the layer 7, is a place where specifically we host the applications, and the layer 4 is a place where the interchange happens, right? So application load balancer completely works on the layer 7, and the network load balancer completely works on the layer 4. So that is the first major difference on where they work. Second is, in this you have only got HTTP and HTTPS. In this we have got the TCP connections as well. Now there are a few more advantages of using the application load balancer as well. So let me give you a very short introduction before we go ahead and conduct a practical session on the ALB. Okay, so typically whenever we are trying to design any of the architecture, what happens in this case? Like, let's say this is the load balancer. This is my server 1, server 2, and let's say server 3. So I have 3 servers and I have a load balancer in front of it. So what I'm going to do is, typically I'm going to connect the load balancer with all 3 of them. And usually what happens, I would have a Route 53 on top of this. And my end users would be specifically, whenever they hit the URL, they're actually hitting the Route 50, and Route 50 is trying to actually hit the load balancer endpoint, and this load balancer is trying to talk to my EC2 instances and distribute the load. That is a normal methodology that we have been following until now when we talk about the elastic load balancer. Now what happens in the application load balancer? So in application load balancer, I can actually divide my requests in the multiple parts. Let's say if I want to host 2-3 different domains, like I have a flipkart.com, I have something like paytm.com, I have, let's say, like amazon.com, I have 3 of them. So what happens in the original case, I need to actually spin up 3 different elastic load balancers, and 3 of them will have a different Route 53 domain pointing, right? And then I need to have the multiple servers as well. So in this case, I'm actually paying the money for 3 different load balancers. Can we do some magic here? Yes, application load balancer actually helps us to do some certain specific magic here. Now, let's say this is actually one complete setup. Okay, so let's say we are trying to host 2 different servers. So we basically have got 2. Yeah. So we have 2 different setups completely. Now with the application load balancer, what I can do actually is, so I will still have, just expand this diagram a little more. Okay, so I will have this for, let's say, Amazon. I'll have this for the Flipkart. Okay, so the people are still trying to navigate. Okay, so I have got 2 different servers. One is for the Flipkart, one is for the Amazon. Okay, so now what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to go ahead also save the cost with the help of application load balancer, and I'm also showing what is going to happen with the ALB in this case, right? So with the ALB, what happens is I just need to have one of them here in this case. Now both the domains are going to point out to the same load balancer. So specifically, I just need to have one load balancer which is going to be running all 24/7. So I'm completely saving a lot of cost in this case here. Now this load balancer is specifically this load balancer is specifically going to navigate the traffic. Now how does it know whether the traffic is coming from Amazon or Flipkart, right? So what we are going to do is, inside this we have a configuration which is called as target groups. So here I am going to put across so this is the target group 1. Let's say this is the target group 2. So I have got something called as target groups, and these target groups are the place where I'm going to register my instances. So I would say that I would like to register the instance 1, instance 2, and then the instance 3, right? Similarly, I'm going to register, let's say, 3 instances here: instance 1, instance 2, and then the instance 3. Okay, so I have got the three instances, one for the Flipkart domain, one for the Amazon domain. But in the normal case or the normal situation, what happens, the public actually comes down to the Route 53. Route 53 will redirect you to the load balancer, and the load balancer is trying to balance the load on each of this EC2 instance, and also tries to check the health of each of the instances. Now in my case here, when I'm trying to use the application load balancer, the multiple domains can be pointing to the same load balancer, and this load balancer has in turn got something called as target groups. Now what happens with the target groups, all the registered targets, wherever I want to conduct a health check, all that will be done with the help of this target groups itself. So I'm going to make use of this target groups, and then I'm going to register all the instances to the target groups. Right, and these target groups are in turn registered with the ALB. So now in the ALB, what I'm going to do is I'm going to define a rule which says whenever you find in the URL the name is Amazon, just try to navigate the traffic to the this set of target group, and this target group is going to have the multiple instances which is going to manage the traffic as well as the health, right? And here again, whenever I see the traffic coming from something called as Flipkart, like in the URL the domain name is Flipkart, and what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to come here, read the rule, and come down here, and then I'll be able to check through. Let's see a very small part of a practical section here. If possible, in the today's part, I'll complete, or else we'll complete in the next part. So I'll just go ahead and click on create the application load balancer here. So it's going to ask me for the name. So I'll say my first app LB. Then it's going to be internet facing. This is going to be with the type of address IPv4. Here it's going to ask me whether I'm going to use HTTP or HTTPS. I'll keep it for HTTP for now. Then it's going to ask me whether you are going to make use of all the availability zones. I'll say yes. And then if you have any tags, there's no difference in the way we spin up the normal load balancer or the application load balancer. I'll just show you how to create a target group and register to this ALB. So I'll just go ahead and say name my first ALB. Since we are trying to use the HTTP protocol, it is not going to ask me for any security settings. And next, at the step number 3, I'm going to go ahead and put across web server security group. And in the step 4, yes, here is the place where I'm going to register my targets, right? So target groups, sorry. So target groups, we can, at this point of time, we can add only one. So once the load balancer is launched, we can go ahead and add one more target group as well. So I'll just go ahead and say we do not have any target group. I'll just say create target group 1. So I'll say target group 1. This is also going to work on the HTTP protocol at the port 80, and the target is going to be EC2 instance. Protocol is HTTP, and we are going to check for the file with the name healthy.html. And in the advanced health settings, I'm just going to keep it everything simple. Interval, I'll just keep it as 10 seconds. Healthy threshold to be part of 3 seconds, so that our health checks are connected much faster. So this page is as same as the way we do it in the Elastic Load Balancer, only few things are different here. So it does ask me the name of the target group, if it is going to be a new one or if you already have an existing one, right? So if it is a new one, just give the name of the target group here. So I'm just going to give it as name as target group 1, and rest of the things remain same. It is going to work on HTTP protocol at the port 80, and the target type is going to be my EC2 instance, and I'm going to check for the file, the name healthy.html as the HTTP protocol. And in the advanced health checkings, we are trying to just check out what is the healthy threshold, unhealthy threshold, and then the timeout and the interval. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and register the targets in this. So currently I do not have any EC2 instances, so I can leave this page blank and then say next review and then say create. Right, so what did we do in this case specifically at this point of time? I created the load balancer, we created one target group. So this specific setting is already done. Currently I do not have instances, so we have not registered it, but we have created the setup of one target group. Now let's see how I can add a second target group to this load balancer. So I'll go ahead and close this. So when you come down to the listeners, so here I'll go inside the view and edit rules. So currently I have mapped it to one target, so it's showing the target group 1. So what I can always do is go to the plus sign and then click on symbol here. Okay, so I'm still able to see the only one target group. So let's go ahead and add the second target group first here. So I'm going to go ahead and create one. So I'll come to the target groups, click on create target group. So I'll say so again, this is going to work on the HTTP protocol at the port 80, and then this is going to be part of the EC2 on the target type. We could do the instance, and this is going to be part of the default VPC. Health check will be done at the HTTP protocol, and the file we are going to check is for the healthy.html. And in the advanced health, we are going to set up the healthy threshold to be part of 3, unhealthy to be 2, timeout 5, and interval to be 30, and then say let's say go ahead and say create. So we are going to close this. So there we go. Now we have two different target groups. So in the target group 1, we are going to add the instances which are going to be of Flipkart. So how do we add the targets? You can simply come down to the specific portion and then click on edit, and then you can say which EC2 instances to be added. So let's say I have got 5 EC2 instances. 2 of them are for Flipkart, 3 of them are for the Amazon.com, right? So from here I can see which of them are for Amazon. I'll add them to the target group 2 and sorry, target group 1, and then the other ones I'll add it to the target group 1. So I have now got 2 target groups. Let's go back to our load balancer in this section now. Again, I'm back to the listeners. Here, when I'm going to click on the view edit rules, so it does ask me what kind of rule would you like to set across. So I can say that here. So it says host header or the path pattern. So I'm going to use the host header. So if I'm saying that if you find anything in the host related to Amazon, right? So I'm telling it to go ahead and forward the request to the target group 2. And if there is anything else, you can forward it to the target group 1. Simple. So, or you can add one more rule as well. Yeah. So here, if you see, now if the host is going to contain the name with the Flipkart, then it's going to go to target group 1. If the host is going to conduct with the name Amazon, then it's going to target group 2. So by default, if anything, it doesn't understand where to go, it will automatically go to the target group 1. Like now by default would be something like this. Let's say I'm trying to copy up this load balancer name, it is load balancer DNS name, and if I try to go ahead and hit it, then it doesn't understand whether the request is coming from the Amazon or the Flipkart, because still we have not mapped the route 53, right? So in that case, it is going to send all the things to the target group 1. So it says the default forwarding is to the target group 1. However, if you go ahead and check out inside, it clearly says that if the host is being Flipkart.com, you will be always targeted to the target group 1, and if the host is going to be Amazon, you are going to send across all the traffic to the target group 2. So now if you go back to our diagram and check it out, so we have now actually created 2 different target groups. We have registered both the target groups with the load balancer, and this load balancer is now going to receive the traffic from the multiple Route 53 domains, right? So with the ALB, we can actually save a lot of cost in the company. So let's say where I have to run around more than 40 plus servers, let's say, usually sometimes it does happen that when we are working in a company, they may have the internal applications. Like I have one application for the payroll, one application for the leave request, one application only for the HR policies. So I might have multiple applications in a single organization. So keeping a load ELB for each and every application is really costlier for me. So what I can do, in fact, I can actually make use of the ALB, where I can set across the target groups, and the traffic can be specifically diverted with the help of any rule that we are going to implement through. So any questions here on the understanding of the ALB? Rahul, Divya? How about you, Divya? Are you able to understand through? Okay, so that was about the ALB, and what happens in the NLB is basically we are trying to, one second, I'll just come down to this one. Yeah, so I'll go back here and let's click on create load balancer and click on NLB. So now the way we again try to spin up a load balancer, it would be more or less same. So I'll just give it as my first NLB, that is network load balancer. Again, this is going to be the internet facing, but here the only change would be I'm going to have only the TCP protocol. Remember, the ELB has got both TCP as well as HTTP and HTTPS, but network load balancer has got only TCP because it operates completely at the layer 4. It is a TCP layer, and the application load balancer is completely operating at the layer 7, that is with the HTTP and the HTTPS protocols. And again, I'm going to keep it in the default VPC with both the availability zones included, and I'll say next, configure the routing. So again, in this case also we are going to have the targets, but you also so I'll just go ahead and give it as the new target group. And then advanced health check again. We'll have this healthy and unhealthy threshold. So some of the things are hardcoded for us, we'll not be able to change through. So if you see the unhealthy threshold and the timeout, we'll not be able to make any changes. That is at 3 and the 10 itself. It's fine. And then we can go ahead and say click on the register targets. So currently we do not have any instances, so you can leave it off as this. So the way we are going to set up, there's no much change. So again, it is going to be as same as the application load balancers, but only thing is we are going to operate it at a layer 4 with only the TCP traffic, right? And in case of the application load balancer, we are trying to use it for the HTTP or the HTTPS traffic, right? Again, in this as well, let's check out what is the difference here. So again, I have the NLB. Okay, so here I'm not getting the option to put across the rules, so I'll not be able to put across any rules, but I'll be able to add multiple listeners in this case. So I can have one listener at port 80, one more listener at port some other, like I can have my HR application hosted on port 80, I can have my leave application hosted on port 8080. So all that things can be done across in this. However, we usually do not make use of it because it makes it much more complicated in this case. So we usually have one listener across it, and we'll try to make use of these sections. So usually application load balancer is much preferred, where I actually can go ahead and configure the rules inside each of the listeners, saying that what will be the rule and what should happen whenever this is a kind of host that is coming in. And the most important difference is, remember, the layer 7 and the layer 4. So application load balancer usually works on the layer 7, and the network load balancer usually works on the layer 4. So in the layer 7,
one question.
Yeah,
In NLB, we have option to choose the protocol HTTP and HTTPS as well, right?
NLB, one second. Yeah, NLB.
In NLB, we have while using a protocol, so we can you selected the TCP, right? So we have options to select HTTP and HTTPS as well.
One second. No, in NLB will have only TCP. Specifically,
while you config this, I saw TCP, HTTP, and HTTPS. So I asked.
Yeah, so usually what happens is in NLB, why we use most of the case NLB is, let's say you have a constant IP address of the servers, okay? So in that case, you would actually like to directly divert your traffic toward that specific IP addresses of the server, right? Now, since your application load balancer is actually operating at a layer 7, it will not have a much wide range of things to check at the back end, right? So with the NLB, what I can actually do is I will be able to straight away hit the server whichever I want to hit across, right? So I can actually go ahead and configure the static IPs and do more things, and the amount of traffic that NLB can handle will be much more higher. The transactions, it will go seamlessly, and I'm just redirecting directly to the specific static IPs of the applications. So even I'm exploring more on this because this has been recently launched around 1.5 months back. So there are a lot of things to learn about it. So I've not implemented the real time. ALB, at least we have implemented it. So we have done the practical use case of hosting the multiple domains inside this. We have created the multiple target groups. We have hosted multiple domains inside one of them itself, and then we have the multiple Route 53 pointing to the same ALB. So NLB part, I've just learned about it little on yet, but I'm not completely put in the real time practice.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So a few more things to remember. At layer 7, people can put across the SQL injection scripts, right? No, sorry, at the layer 4, the people can actually put across the SQL injection scripts with the help of which they can actually attack your application or do some things, right? So usually that's why we prefer to go with the ALB for any web-based application where you want to make a hosting. You go for the layer 7, so that people, in case if they want to inject any SQL scripts and try to hack in your server, the most of the things are terminated at the ALB level itself or the layer 7, and they'll not be able to send across any kind of hacking request inside the applications. But at the layer 4, which is at the TCP level, in this we will be able to inject the SQL scripts because we are directly connected to the servers behind, and that is a little different in the way how the layer 4 and the layer 7 load balancers work. So we always have to take care where we are going to implement the NLBs, and we have to take care where we are going to put across the ALBs. So NLBs specifically we are going to put across for the databases or somewhere else where I know that it is completely internal or completely on the backend side, as well it is going to help me directly connect to my IP addresses behind the scene of my machines, which are not going to change over the period of life. So any questions here from any one of you? So referring back to our course schedule on what all we have covered it up. So here is the list. Okay, so we started with that IAM section where we started learning the administration and the security portion. So where we started creating the users, roles, groups, how to set up the multi-factor authentication and the other things, right? And then we looked across the storage section and the CloudFront part. Of course, we covered the CloudFront at the last part in this section. And then we learned about the S3, how to create a bucket, what is the version control, what is a cross-region replication, how can we implement lifecycle management rules, how can we ensure about the security and encryptions, and we learned different types of securities and encryptions. Remember the types of encryptions, there are two types. One is in transit and second is when the data is at rest. So in transit, we are going to completely cover it using the SSL and the TLS, and while the data is being at rest, we are using the methods like SSC, SSCC, that is server-side encryption with the customer provided keys, SSC KMS, that is server-side encryption with the key management service, and the AWS SSC, that is server-side encryption. And then we have the final one, that is encryption at your own customer-side encryption itself. So customer will encrypt the data in his computer and then he sends the data, right? And then we learned about the storage gateways, that is volumes gateway, NFS gateway, and then the VTP, that is virtual tape libraries. And then we learned about the snowball transfer acceleration and how to get started by creating a static website on the S3 as well. And we learned about the CloudFront, how to create it and completely do it, apply it in the real time of the project. In this section of the compute, we learned what is the EC2 instance, what are the important things of the EC2 instance like security groups, volumes in the snapshots, how to create your Windows instance, what is a RAID, what is an AMI, how to create it, what is the difference between the EBS root volume and the instance store volumes. Then we looked across what is a load balancer and the health check. Then we learned about what is CloudWatch. We learned about the little bit on the command lines and how we are able to establish the commands with the from the EC2 section to the S3. How can we automate the transfer of data? The commands are simple, just the basic Linux commands. It is like AWS S3 and then we say ls to list the files, AWS S3 and then we say CP to copy the files, AWS S3 and then we say sync to synchronize both the folders. And then using the IAM roles, we are also trying to implement what happens with the EC2. So how can we make use of the roles? And then we learned about the bootstrap script, what is the power of a bootstrap script. And then we learned about the instance metadata, auto scaling groups. And then we learned about the placement groups, elastic file systems for this lab. And then on the Lambda, we had a short introduction. And then in the terms of networking, we learned about the Route 53, how to set up the complete lab, what are the different routing policies. And then we started learning about the VPC. So where we had a complete overview of what is a VPC, how to create one, what is a NAT instance, what is a Bastion host, what are ACLs, that is network ACL, and what is the difference between the NAT and the Bastion, how can we set up the logs for the VPC, and how can we clean up the complete VPC section. And then we learned about the databases, where we had a introduction on what is database. And then we started with the RDS section, that is relational database systems. We learned about how to launch a MySQL DB, and then learn in detail about what is called as a multi-AZ, what happens with the backups of the RDS, and what are something called as read replicas, how do we improve the performance in this case of databases. We learned about the DynamoDB, Redshift, Elasticache, Aurora, and the summarized, and then we summarized the databases. So in DynamoDB also again we learned in detail how to create the tables inside a DynamoDB, how to get connected from a EC2 instance, and then we saw what is called as a push button scaling in the NoSQL DBs. In the application services, we covered a whole bunch of services. Here I have listed only a few of them: SQS, SWF, SNS, Elastic Transcoder, application services. We learned about the Kinesis, we learned about the API gateways, we learned about how the Active Directory integration happens. So there were a bunch of application services that we tried to cover up. And then finally, we learned about the project and the complete implementation. And then we just flipped through the security white papers in the last couple of sections. And then today we learned about one of the topic that was recently added up, that is about the ALBs and the NLBs. So I just wanted to give you an overview on how the ALBs and the NLBs work in the real time. So remember, the ALBs will always have, ALBs and NLBs usually have the target groups, and the target groups will have the targets registered. So your target is nothing but a EC2 instance. And we are going to specifically save a lot of amount of money in terms of using the ALBs and the NLBs when compared to using the ELBs, where I need to have a separate setup for each of the application. So any questions or any queries or any doubts on the complete overview here? SCS is basically simple email service. So it does happen that, let's say, if I have purchased single domain like with my name, like let's say @pawan.com, and if I want to create my own email IDs and then want to manage my mail domain as well along with it, so we can actually make use of SCS, where we can actually trigger the email notifications and other things. Yeah, SNS is more about only sending the notifications, but SCS is more about managing your own email. As I said, let's say if I have my own domain, that is at the rate pawan.com. So if I want to manage my domain, I want to see that any domains that any email that come to, let's say if I've created something like example at the rate pawan.com, or maybe if people are working in my company, we will specifically create the IDs with that specific case, right? So it will be like kumar at the rate pawan.com, something like that. So all those email IDs and other things we can actually configure from the SCS and map it as a MX domain for the mail. Yes, for the solutions architect exams, these are the major topics that are required to cover it up. So after this, what I would suggest is, specifically before appearing for the exam, just go through this FAQ section. So when you say AWS FAQ, for each of the services, we have the FAQs. So let's click on the AWS FAQ here. So we have FAQs for each of them, like for EC2, for the VPC, right? For the S3, for the EBS, EFS. So there are a lot of things that are available as a part of the FAQs. So I'll just open up one of them. Like let's say I'm going to open up the EC2 here. Okay, so it is giving me the overall view of what happens with the recently frequently asked questions. Right? Let's say if I have something in billing, right? So it is going to ask me how will I be charged and billed for the usage of my EC2 instance, right? So you only pay for whatever you're using. Display pricing is an hourly rate, but depending on which instances you choose, you pay by hour or by seconds, right? On the each instance type. Partial instance hours consumed are billed using the instance usage. So there are some things which may get covered only while we are trying to review through the FAQs, right? We have actually heard that Amazon has introduced something called as per second billing, but whatever instances we are launching, we are going to be charged at per hour base, right? The T2 micros are basically per hour base. So when do I get per second billing? So that's what here, if you once you read this answer, you get to get an overview of the idea, right? So it says displayed pricing is hourly rate, but depending upon the instances you choose, means there are certain instances which are going to be basically per second. So here, if you want to go and check out, here is given the full detail. So I would suggest you guys go down. Of course, we are now clear with what is called as a EC2, what to do with it. So from here, what is the next step to get through, right? So we need to go through FAQs for the major sections. So just refer to this specific slide where we have the FAQs to be studied for the S3, FAQ to be studied for EC2, EBS, DNS, VPC, databases, and the application services a little bit. So these are the most important topics that are mostly required to be covered up in the FAQs, where you get a little more better overview of each and every service before you make an attempt to the exam. So in the FAQs, you do have a lot of different things as well. There are certain scenarios where you actually also get an overview to look out at the practical real-time problems that occur in the Amazon. One second. Yeah. So usually, in case if you also want to see what are the real-time problems that people have been facing, and if you want to have a solutions for that, Amazon has also created as part of this, so called as, just go to the Google and just say premium support AWS. So in the premium support AWS, what happens is, specifically, remember when you're trying to create an AWS account, it does ask you what kind of plan you would like to go for, whether you like to go for basic, developer, business, or the higher one, right? So in this case, we went for the basic one. That's fine for us to play around with the AWS. Now, if you want to really understand what problems people have actually got in the real time, we can actually go down to this specific page. This is really helpful. Even whenever I get time, I usually go through this specific premium support page and just try to understand the problems here. Let me show you where it is. Yeah, in the premium support, we have something called as Knowledge Center. Just go inside this. Right now, in this case of the Knowledge Center, we do have a lot of things which are available. Like, let's say whatever problems people have faced in the real time. Let's say if I want to check out the problems with the EC2 section, I'll click on this, and here are the questions. Like, so some people are still unsure of how do I delete or terminate my EC2 instances, or how can I add additional SSH user account in the cloud, right? So specifically now, once we launch the instance, we currently have one user, that is EC2-user, with which we are logging in. So if you want to add one more user, how do we do it, right? So those kind of things, like how do I restore or recover the terminated instance? So there are certain cases where people have terminated the instance. Now they would like to recover it. Can we recover it, right? So those kind of the questions can be expected in the interview. So you can just go down to this premium support and then just try to check out in this case, and let's see what happens. Right. So as a part of EC2 instance termination, the data on the instance store volumes associated with the instance deleted by default, right? So it says it get deleted. However, if you have backups in the form of snapshots or the emergence, but yeah, so it's clearly saying that that instance once terminated will not be able to recover it at all, right? After an EC2 instance has been terminated, it is not possible to recover either the original EC2 instance or any of the volumes deleted as a part of termination process. Always remember, if you have got the snapshots which are taken for the EBS, then at least from that you'll be able to recover the data, but there's no way I'll be able to recover any instance from once it is terminated. So even if I go back to the support case and say that this was my EC2 instance which has got terminated by mistake, no, there's no way we can get it back. So always ensure that whenever you're creating the instances, if you're trying to store some data on the EBS volumes, it is always a best practice that I always take the snapshots, right? Because once terminated, there's no way we can actually get it back, right? Similarly, there are a few more questions that you may actually want to look like there's one more. My EC2 instance is in private subnet and can't connect to the internet using a NAT gateway. So what can be the problems, right? So you can check out what all can be the practical problems from the NAT. Now you already know what is a NAT, what is a private subnet. First thing, from your perspective, what can be a real-time problem if the EC2 instance is a private subnet? Why it is unable to connect to the internet using the NAT gateway? Remember what happens in the NAT gateway? We need to assign an elastic IP address, and we need to also ensure and see that the NAT gateway is also up and running, right? So there are certain things that we need to check through. So here it says verify that the destination is reachable by pinging the destination from another source using a public IP address, or verify that the NAT gateway is in available state. Make sure that you have created a NAT gateway in the public subnet. Yes, this is really important. Sometimes we create a NAT gateway, but that is not maybe a part of public subnet at all. So in that case, we are losing the way in which the NAT gateway can work. And remember, we have to make changes in the route table as well, right? So once you go through this set of the questions, you can also be very much sure in case you are going to attend the interview. Of course, I understand that there are a lot of questions in this page, but I'm not saying to go through each and every one of them, but at least whatever topics we have covered, given the time, over the period of time, just try to add knowledge and grasp up whatever is feasible from your side, right? So even I still look back at these questions because sometimes I get a better knowledge by looking at these. So every day at least 1 or 2 questions from your side. In next 365 days you will have at least a knowledge of 700 plus questions, right? So with the time, what we are going to go ahead, cloud is going to be really an emerging market. There are lots of openings in the cloud. Trust me, every day at least I get minimum of 3 to 4 calls on the AWS cloud as a requirement. Even today, yes, with the start of the new year in 2018, with the first quarter just kicked up, there are few lots and lots of more openings which are going to be expected by the end of February. So you guys have still got a good time of 1 month for the preparation before you can go. And for the interviews, there's no necessary thing to be having a certification in hand. That's pretty fine even if you do not have certification, but certification just adds up a lot of value. But without certification also, we can actually go ahead and make a attempt for the interviews. So before we make an attempt for the interviews, just try to go through these FAQs, try to go with this premium knowledge support center, and try to learn some of the major topics like EC2 and the VPC. These are the major topics any interviewer would crack down on, right? So always ensure that you go through this EC2 and at least the VPC section and the EBS, since EBS is again a part of EC2. So these are the major sections where the interviewers completely crack down on when we are going to attend it. So those are the major things I would say. Just pay attention towards it and always keep learning. Just go through this, and sometimes you may be also asked what kind of solutions you have actually tried to implement through in the real time. So just come down to this aws.amazon.com/answers. Again, this specific page, what I'm talking about, aws.com/answers, is really a superb page where people have discussed about their real-time scenarios. So what is the kind of solution they have implemented in the real time? Like let's say they wanted to control the EC2 operating system access. So how have they done in the real time? What are the important things to be taken care? So if you just go ahead and open up this specific video, like securing the EC2 instances, securing the account for when it is being set up for the first time. So whatever topics you feel are relevant to the way what we have learned through, you can just go ahead and open it up and then check out the real-time situations on how the things are implemented, right? So in this case, he has actually given the answers on how the things are implemented. You can download the PDF, which is giving a complete brief solution as well, right? So in the aws.com, aws.amazon.com/answers, the real-time projects where the people have actually made use of it, right? So we can actually check those things. So we also have something called as EC2 scheduler, which is very much popular getting these days. So we can actually put across a schedule for each of the EC2 instance. Now let's say we are working in a company which is operating from 9 to 6. However, I would like to keep my systems or the servers switched on from the 8 o'clock in the morning up till 7 o'clock. Rest of the hours I can still save the cost of the money, right? So how can we do it? Specifically, I can put across behind this scheduler, and this scheduler is going to ensure that automatically the system switches on at the 8 in the morning and 7 in the evening, automatically the systems go down, right? So I get the saving here. So we have 24 hours in a day. So at least if I'm switching the system on only for the 8 hours, I'm still saving the rest of the 16 hours in a day, right? So you can just imagine the amount of savings that you're going to get by switching off the system, right? So how can the scheduler actually work? So we have something called as Lambda. We have the CloudWatch events, and we are trying to store everything in the DynamoDB, which is a NoSQL DB, and then we are trying to connect to our EC2 instances, and then we're getting it, right? So we also have a complete deployment solution here provided with it. So it also says what we are going to achieve with this, right? And what can we do, right? So this is really good to know what kind of solutions are there, what is done. So in case if you're going to the interview and if you have already had a look at a couple of solutions from this, that really gives a good kickstart saying that I have implemented this kind of solution, right? So in that case, interviewer also feels that yes, this guy has done up a little work. Of course, I know that in the real time, the cloud is just emerging. There are very few profiles which are actually available who have got a real-time experience of more than 3+ years. Even I do not commit that I have more than 3 years. It's just been 2 years I have been working overall in the cloud, 2.5 years I would say. So 1.5 years specifically in the AWS cloud, and now I am working as a DevOps engineer where I am trying to automate the complete environment and migrate the solutions from the real-time on-premises towards the AWS cloud. So we are now actually implementing all these things in the real time, that EC2 scheduler. Before this, I used to do the POCs on talking with the client and helping them with the complete setup of the solution and show it how it actually happens in the cloud. So you guys may also want to go ahead, explore these specific cases and see how the real-time solutions have been implemented for some of the companies. So some solutions are already given here. For some of them, I guess the videos are also there. I guess it's available on the YouTube. I'm not sure.
I found one quick question.
Yeah.
Regarding you said about the schedulers, right? So, but still, until the EC2 instance gets terminated, but it will be billable, right? Even though if we stop the instance, because the
Yeah,
volumes will be dedicated for that instance.
Correct. When we stop it, we are still going to be billed for the volumes, but at least the instance running state will be in a stop mode. So at least we are going to save price on that.
So what if it is inactive?
If it is active, which means it is running.
Right.
Like
so however, it will be billable, right?
Yeah. Let's say I'll give you one small example in this case. Now you have a laptop or a computer at your home. Okay. Now whenever you switch it on, basically you're trying to use it, right? When you're using it, you're trying to consume some services. Like you are trying to consume electrical service and you are going to get bill for the electricity. Right? So when it is in switched on mode, you are at least paying for something. But when it is in shutdown mode, you are just keeping it idle, which means you are reducing a little bit of cost.
So you mean to say in terms of applications or what?
Sorry, I didn't get it.
I mean, you said that we use some services, right? So that will be billable. So you mean to say like that? I mean, some services which are billable or will be running on that server. So by acting it in scheduler, so we can save the money that way.
Correct. So usually what happens is like, see, EPS volumes are also having certain IOPS, right? So we are paying for those IOPS. Specifically now, when it is in shutdown state, like it is in idle, it is not doing any work, right? So at least I am saving a little price for that period of time over there. So my EC2 instance is shut down, my EBS volumes are not operational, so there is no input output operations happening on that. So if my EC2 instance is connecting to the S3 or maybe it is connecting to the RDS, so then we are trying to utilize the IOPS, or maybe we are trying to consume some CPU cycles, and then we are trying to hit somewhere. So we are trying to do some real-time business with that one, right? So if you want to really save on that, specifically, we can actually go with that case of stopping the instances. So at least you will be able to save the cost. See, here you may be billed at, let's say, $1 per hour, but here you will be billed at maybe mostly 0.1 or $0.2 per hour. It is at least 80% of saving, right, from the original cost what you are still incurring. Of course, there is a cost involved. I'm not saying the cost will not be involved when I shut down my instance, but at least the amount of cost involved is very less. When it is $1 per hour in the normal day, here it will be around $0.2 or $0.3. That's why we are saying up to 70% savings, right? So you may reduce in some cases up to 70%, in some cases maybe up to 50% at least.
Right. Thank you.
There's one thing that I would like to show. 1 second. this is one more thing where we have this is my architecture kind of thing, and I'm not sure if they're still releasing it, but I guess they do have usually every 1 week or 2 weeks they usually release the videos in this my architecture, where they actually discuss about the architecture of one of the bigger companies who have implemented their solutions on the AWS. So this can also give you a good idea on how the solutions are implemented. So you may go down to any of the specific video, which is of just 5 to 6 minutes. Just try to cover up one video in a week and just try to learn about few of the things. So the major companies, how have they implemented the real-time scenarios in the AWS, how they actually are trying to do it. So the videos are very short of 6 and 7 minutes itself, but they give you a good idea of how they have implemented the services. So in this, they are trying to talk about the Expedia company who has actually implemented the complete DevOps architecture in terms of the Jenkins, Docker, and other thing. How are they using it? Why is it required? Like they have again started. So most of the things are discussed in this case, right? So you may also may be interested to just look through these architectures, which give us a real-time implementation scenario. Yeah, so that's it, Rahul. I guess these are the things that I wanted to share with you guys. So I'm hoping that we can continue with a good career in the cloud, which is going to be really an emerging area in the upcoming days. Trust me, there are a lot of job opportunities. The job description, when it comes, they do ask really a lot of things, but when you go for the real-time interview, they do not require so many things. That's all I would say. Just that they want to have a overview that's saying that this person should have so many skills, but practically it is not possible. Trust me, even I do get a lot of profiles for the interview in my company, wherein if I see the job description that the company would have posted in the outside in the Naukri or somewhere else, it would be very high, saying asking them to know DevOps, asking them to know the AWS, asking them to know lots of different tools, asking them to know what is Ruby, Python, or so many languages. But this is really not possible that a certain person will have so many skills. But of course, if they have a skill in one area which is much more perfect, that's more than enough for a person to get started with, right? Now we have a good hold on AWS. Learn the major important services, that is compute, storage, databases, and the networking, right? So if you are perfect with these four also, there are a lot of things that can be explored further with the first job profile that you can get onto the AWS. So nothing to worry about. Do not worry with the job descriptions that you see in the market. They are just trying to save their companies just by putting up a lot of things in that. But of course, there are no real-time people who have got so much of knowledge. So if you ask me also, I'm trying to learn the DevOps yet. So I'm doing the migration from the last 7 months over the DevOps. So we are learning a lot of different new tools every day, because certain time the client would say, I would like to implement the things on Ansible. Sometimes he would say, I want to implement on Puppet. Right. So we keep on changing the tools. Within the last 7 months, we have changed the 3 tools by now. So we have to experiment and then let the client know whether this solution is feasible or not. Right. So things happen, and gradually we are progressing and emerging in the cloud. So the next 3 or 4 years are at least a very good market. Just get into the AWS, try to work in the real time. You will be able to make a good career for yourself. Any more questions or things that you have, Rahul, to ask for me?
No problem. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks. And with this said, we are going to wrap up this session. Okay, so with this said, we end up this batch here. So if there are any questions or queries, please feel free to get back to me at any point in time. So this is my email ID. Right, so just get back to me at any point in time. So if you guys have any doubts, queries, I'll be glad to answer it back. So with this said, we are now going to get started in a better career. So nevertheless, it's not an end. This was just the end of the course, but the real time and the practical implementation of what we have learned starts from today. Just get back to all the videos that you have, try to practice it. In case if you guys have some of the videos missing, let me or Visual Part team know. We'll try to arrange it back for you. In case if you have missed any of the classes, you may join back in any of the upcoming batches which are already running. So we already have one of the batches which is running. So in case if you feel you have missed out any of the classes in between, you can rejoin back in one of those currently running batches and get cleared on your concepts, so that in future you will be able to make it a better place to work with the AWS cloud.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Yeah, so that's all from my side. Wish you all the best and for your future career, and hope we meet back again somewhere in the real-time work or somewhere else where we are doing the things. However, we are not departing from here, so at least we are on the emails. We will be connected. So any queries, any doubts, anytime, just put through.
Yeah, sure.